All right, so welcome to the Caregiver Education Series. Today I'm going to talk about long distance caregiving. My name is Kendall Kopchick. I'm one of the social workers here at the Orange County Department on Aging. There we go. So I thought I would start today by just kind of doing a brief overview of kind of who do we mean when we say long distance caregiver. I think those are two important components that sometimes a lot of folks don't self-identify with. So starting actually a little backwards with who is a caregiver. I think a lot of people who are providing care don't always think of themselves as caregivers. They just think like, oh, this is what I do as a family member. I help out this person. But a caregiver can be a friend, a son or a daughter, niece, nephew, spouse, really any family member or friend or someone that is providing care for someone that they care about and supporting someone they care about. It doesn't have to be, what we think of as, the hands-on personal care. Doesn't necessarily have to be their power of attorney. It can be anyone who is providing some type of support. So when in doubt, someone can be considered a caregiver. So I don't want folks to shy away from using that term. And then in terms of long distance, that can also be very open. It can be 30 minutes away, 2 hours away, or 15 hours, a different state, a different city, a different country. It can be as far away or as close as can be. But I like to think of it as any situation where your loved one does not live with you and you cannot always be there. So even if they're just down the road, if you work full time or you just can't always be there, that can be kind of a form of long distance. So that's kind of the population I had in mind when putting together these next few slides. So starting out with, you're getting into this caregiving journey with this person who does not live with you, and you're trying to figure out what your role is and what you're supposed to be doing. So the first thing I'm going to advise people to do is to consider your loved one's wants and needs. That's the only way you're going to know exactly what your person wants or needs, is to ask them. It's not helpful to just assume that they need all this help that they may not need, and assume that they're helpless, or that they want to leave their home. A lot of times when folks, maybe get a certain diagnosis or reach a certain age, people start to think, oh, okay, well, that means, they've got to move in with their adult child, or they've got to go live in an assisted living facility. And that's definitely not always the case. We have to take into account what that person wants, and what they need. And their needs, are mostly determined by them. In some cases, if there is some cognitive change, you do have to take into account the words of a doctor or other type of professional on what they might need. But for the most part, people are able to articulate their needs. And on the other side, on one side, you don't want to assume they're helpless, but on the other side, you don't always want to wait to ask them for them to ask you for support. A lot of people are really afraid to ask for help, especially if it's a situation where, it's an adult child and, they've parented you your entire life and for a large portion of their life. And, it's hard for them to change that role of caring for you, their child, to being cared for. Or if it's a spouse who, always used to keep the house together, was always the one cooking meals and taking care of someone when they were sick, and now they need someone to do some of those tasks for them. So offer support before someone asks for it, but don't just jump in with all these things that they may not need, because people want to maintain their independence. And then continue to check in. That'll be kind of a reoccurring theme today. But everyone's condition changes. Some days you need help with things, some days you're able to do it yourself. So just continue to check in with your person. So that's a kind of an overarching thing to keep in mind as we're navigating this. So let's say that you are caring for someone who's in a different city or state or just general region of the country. Another piece of advice is going to be to have some contacts who are close by. So someone who's going to be kind of your boots on the ground, people that they can be in touch with when you can't be there. So knowing the resources around your loved one, a few helpful ones to know would be your local area agency on aging. They are aware of all the different services that your loved one may qualify for. They may have programs like we at the Orange County Department on Aging have, our telephone reassurance programs, different things where there's someone close by who can kind of check in. Faith communities are also a really big source of support for people living alone. A lot of people have churches or synagogues they've gone to for years and years, and those places often have resources to help folks out with errands or different chores around the house, things like that. Friends and neighbors is also important, just to know who those people are that your loved one is spending time with, people who will kind of notice more as things change. If that's someone who, they have lunch with every Tuesday, they're going to have kind of a steady idea of, what's this person like, what kind of things can they do now, maybe they didn't used to be able to do, or the other way around. So keeping close contact with those people is really important. And then medical providers. It's not going to be possible for you to go to every single doctor's appointment, but having some type of connection with your loved one's medical team is going to be a helpful tool to have, so that, if you have questions about, you're noticing some changes, you can be in contact with them. That's usually going to require there to be a healthcare power of attorney in place, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But remaining connected with those people is going to be a big asset for you. And of these kind of different resources and contacts that you have in the area, I would also recommend having someone who can kind of be your on-call person in case of emergencies. So maybe it's a neighbor who can come and check in if for some reason, your loved one's not answering the phone, you haven't heard from them, you can't get a hold of them, someone who can just kind of go over there and check. Or someone who, if there's a last-minute doctor's appointment that, your loved one can't drive themselves to, or just want someone to go there with them, maybe they need to be mildly sedated, can't get themselves there, just someone who can do those little things like that every now and again when you can't get there. If there's not a friend or neighbor who you can kind of rely on to do that, one thing to consider might be a geriatric care manager. Those are professionals. Sometimes they have a background in social work, sometimes in nursing or gerontology, but folks who are experts on, they're actually called aging life care specialists now. That's their certification. So coordinating all those pieces of aging life care and growing older and all the resources available there. And they can be someone to accompany someone to doctor's visits, or just kind of be a friendly visitor to check in on, coordinate care, things like that. They do tend to be a little bit on the expensive side, but if you're using them sparingly, that may be worth it to just have someone kind of on call. The other thing, kind of going off of that geriatric care manager, is looking at paid assistance. So if your loved one needs help just maybe a few times a week, not enough to justify them, living in an assisted living facility or going to move in with a family member, but just someone every now and then to provide a little bit of support to allow them to remain in their home. There's I like to break it down into 3 different types of in-home assistance that is usually paid in some form. So the first being companion care. This is kind of our lowest level of care, and these are usually some type of a social visitor, provide very minor assistance. They may be able to help someone up, kind of help them get around, walk from place to place, maybe the occasional make a meal together or something very minor, but mainly their purpose is, social visitor, to be some extra eyes on that person, things like that. And sometimes in some areas, those are volunteers. In Raleigh, there's the Center for Volunteer Caregiving that has volunteers who do that. I've heard that happening in other areas as well. But other than that, it usually is a private pay situation. So that can be helpful if someone is particularly isolated as well. The next one is probably going to be one of our more common ones. So that's home care. And this is usually provided by a certified nursing assistant. So someone who can do medication management, do some meal prep, personal care, kind of some little household tasks like laundry and light cleaning, things like that, just to kind of do some general helping of someone. And again, that can be a private pay situation. Medicaid will often pay for the personal care side of it. So if someone needs help bathing or dressing, things like that, Medicaid will often pay for that. And then there's also some different grant funds, particularly for folks in caregiver situations. So if you're needing some help funding that, there may be some funding sources available in the area, and that's why having contacts at that area agency on aging near your loved one can be helpful. And then the last one is called home health care, and that one is typically ordered by a doctor. It's most common after a hospitalization or a surgery or a discharge from a skilled nursing facility. And those are people who will provide skilled care like physical or occupational or speech therapy. Sometimes you'll have a nurse, an RN nurse, come in and administer some types of like intravenous medications or things like that. It's not super common, except for after surgeries and things like that. But it is helpful, if there's a transportation issue for things like getting to physical therapy. And that will usually be covered by insurance if it's after some type of a qualifying event like a surgery or an injury. So the financial and legal considerations are usually one of the toughest things that people have taking over, and a little bit one of the more stressful things. So hopefully some of these things will help make that a little bit of an easier transition for you all. So I mentioned powers of attorney earlier when we talked about the medical team. So ideally, it's helpful to have both a healthcare power of attorney and a financial power of attorney. The financial power of attorney is usually kind of what most people think of when they think of power of attorney. It's someone who can go to the bank and manage your financial affairs, can sign contracts for you, sell and buy property, all those kind of things. And then a healthcare power of attorney is the person that is designated to make medical decisions in the event that you can't make them for yourself. And that's really important to put in place early on because, once someone needs that, they can't often sign the paper and say it. So it's better to put in place before it's needed so that you know what your loved one would want, and that you're the one to be making those decisions. So that's just something I recommend people put in place, and they're pretty easy documents to fill out. It's really just some signatures. Most lawyers can put them together. You can actually get a lot of those forms online and just have them notarized yourself too. And then if a financial power of attorney isn't in place yet, or if it's, not something that your person is interested in, shared accounts can be helpful. I've seen a lot of people have, just both names on the checking account so that if you need to pay a bill for them or you need to talk to the bank about a transaction you noticed, it's a lot easier when your name's on the account versus having to pull out the power of attorney and show them. That can be really helpful. In the case that you have to, report a scam or a fraud, so that we recommend monitoring those accounts, credit cards in particular, for scams and things like that. If you see a really big transaction that you weren't expecting, or money all of a sudden has gone missing, that's definitely usually a red flag. If it becomes an issue that your loved one is falling victim to these pretty often, it may be worth reaching out to the credit card or the bank to set limits on those accounts or cards. So maybe they can only spend this much money at once in one transaction without it being flagged. Just something to consider so we avoid having those scams take place. Considering online banking or having bills mailed to you, that can make things a little bit easier than all of a sudden you show up, for your monthly visit and there's a big stack of bills and you have no idea what's been paid, what hasn't been paid. Online banking can make that a little easier if you're not super into the idea of online banking. If that makes you a little security cautious, having bills actually sent to your address rather than your loved ones can be a helpful tool. And in terms of all this paperwork, developing a system for those files early on can be really helpful. I think one of the most stressful situations we see is a loved one has been in the hospital and no one knew that they were having trouble managing all their financial and legal paperwork until that person's in the hospital and the insurance is calling and asking questions, and you have to go through this big stack of papers to figure out what the insurance is covering and where the accounts are and all these different things. So developing some type of a filing system that both you and your loved one understand and know how to navigate, so that in the event that you need things, both of you are able to find them and it's not a terribly stressful situation. So everyone is going to be able to visit your loved one at a different time period. Maybe you can only be there every 6 months. Maybe you can only be there every month, every week, doesn't matter. It's can be as frequently or infrequently, but you still want to make the most of your visits. So the first piece being plan ahead, and that's not always possible. You know, sometimes things happen and you just need to go and get up there. But when you can, you know, have a regular schedule of your visits. Consider scheduling doctor's appointments or special projects. You know, if the car needs to be inspected, maybe you're involved with that, or there's some type of a repair that has to happen. Maybe it's helpful that you be there for those. So think about those things that need to get done and make sure that's scheduled into your visit so it doesn't totally catch you off guard when you get there. Connecting with those local contacts that we mentioned earlier. So those friends and neighbors, medical teams, things like that, connecting with those people so that they kind of can put a face to the name, so that if you do need to call them for any reason, they have a connection with you, and it just creates a better human relationship than just dealing with someone over the phone. And also thanking them for what they're doing to support your loved one, because those are really helpful people that you'll want to be able to utilize. So maintaining that relationship is going to be really important. Another really important thing to remember is to connect with your loved one on those visits. You know, it's very easy when you're in kind of a caregiving situation to just go up there and be like, okay, I've got to go see mom. We've got to take her to the doctor. I've got to make sure all her laundry's done, prep some meals and put them in the freezer, and we've got to clean everything up. And you've got this long list of tasks you have to do, and your loved one is just standing there, you know, oh, it's great to see you. And you don't even have time to connect with them. So remembering that it's not all business, you know, you're in this caregiving relationship because this is someone that you care about, and that you have this important relationship with. So making sure that you're taking time to connect and enjoy the visit, because at the end of the day, that relationship with that person is the most important thing. The other thing to kind of pay attention to during those visits is to make sure they have the tools that they need. So kind of pay attention to your loved one's home, the tasks that they're having trouble with. What are things that can make it easier for them when you're not around? So what are tasks that you normally help them with when you're there? What can it be? What can you do to make it easier for them when you're not there? Durable medical equipment is definitely something to consider. So things like walkers and wheelchairs, shower chairs. You know, this is an ideal shower that maybe not everyone has, but there's definitely equipment that you can put in there. You know, the handheld shower nozzle, shower benches, just to make that a little bit safer and easier. If you notice there's places where they're walking around where they're having to grab onto furniture or onto the towel rod, which we don't want them to do because those aren't stable, consider putting in grab bars or something more secure to make it a little easier on them. Another thing people have a lot of fear about when someone is living alone is falling or some type of emergency. So considering those emergency alert systems, a lot of people know the life alert ones, but there's lots of different brands and types. There's types that will connect you directly to 911, that will connect them to you, or to a call center that can kind of determine where their call needs to go. So there's all different types. So that if that's something you're concerned about, definitely look into that, and we can definitely help get you connected with different types and explain those to you. And then random little tools that, you know, you don't really think about until you need them, but things like if you notice they have a really hard time opening jars, you know, they've got these gadgets that make that easier. Can openers, I see people struggle with can openers a lot. Think about little things like that. These little grabbers, you know, if you don't want people climbing up onto chairs to try and reach something, ideally making sure that the things they use regularly are on an easier level for them. But if there's something small, you know, like a towel or something that they need to reach from a higher shelf, those grabbers can be really helpful. So just kind of pay attention to those things and see if there's any tools or equipment you can put in place that's going to make things easier for them when you're not there, and kind of prolong their ability to stay at home, because that's really the goal of this. If someone wants to remain in their home, we want to make sure that they can stay there as long as possible. So when you're not there, and when your visit is done and you're gone, you've gone back home, remembering to stay in touch. I know it can be very exhausting if you've just been there for a long weekend and you've gotten all this stuff done and you're like, okay, I don't have to worry about this for a little longer. But staying in touch with that person will really help you kind of stay on top of their needs, so that we don't have some type of a crisis where, something has happened and we had no idea that they needed help. So maintaining a schedule, whether that's, regular phone calls, but don't limit yourself to phone calls. Sometimes things like letters and cards can be another nice way to stay in touch. I think people forget about how nice it is to receive a handwritten letter in the mail, and that can really lift someone's spirits, especially if they're feeling isolated. So that's something to consider. FaceTime and Zoom calls, I think we've all gotten very used to that, but if that's something your loved one is able to navigate and you are as well, that can be not a complete substitute for a visit, but a nice way to make contact in between those visits. I know a lot of us are tired of them, but it can be nice to actually see a face if it's been a while. We talked about scheduling visits regularly, at least so, even if they're not for a long time in between, at least they know, okay, I'm going to see this person in 3 months and 6 months, and they can kind of have an idea of when that's going to be. They're not just waiting, oh, I don't know when I'll see this person again. So having that schedule in place, even if it's just a tentative, you don't have an official date, but just know I'm going to be there at some point in June. And again, remaining in contact with those local connections so that they can kind of have eyes on your person, and let you know what's been going on. And this is always going to change. Assessing your person's needs is going to be a continuous process. Their condition is likely going to change, just like all of our condition changes. Everyone is aging, everyone is, getting sick, getting better, everything changes. So unfortunately, you'll come up with a system that works and is in place. You'll have all these tools in place, and then something will change and you'll have to try something new. So it's unfortunate, but there are ways to adapt. And, if we prepare for things and make sure people have the tools they need, hopefully these changes are not too drastic. So pay attention to things that may seem different between conversations and visits. So if you call your loved one every Tuesday and Thursday and you notice that they're repeating the same stories, even though it was, just a few days ago, we all do that sometimes, but if you're noticing it becoming a regular occurrence, that's something to kind of pay attention to in terms of changes in cognition. In between visits, if you notice that maybe there's significant weight loss or weight gain, that can be a sign of either illness or, not comfortable cooking or just not wanting to cook, and having trouble managing their own diet. Signs of falls and injuries. A lot of times people don't like to admit when they've fallen or if they've hurt themselves, but you'll get there and you'll notice there's a bruise somewhere or they've got a lot of Band-Aids. So just paying attention for those signs. And, again, everyone hurts themselves and falls sometimes, but looking for kind of those more repetitive incidents or serious injuries. And then financial changes, going back to those, watching out for scams. If you're watching onto their accounts and their credit cards, just looking for missing money, large withdrawals or deposits or something like that. I guess we won't complain too much about large deposits, but large changes in money can be definitely a red flag. So just keeping an eye out for really any major changes, and trusting your instincts. If you feel like something's different, don't try and just brush it off, because it's better to address it earlier just to make sure. And then this is a theme of every conversation I have, but I like to remind caregivers to take care of yourself. A lot of times people think, oh, well, at least, this person doesn't live with me. It would be a lot harder if they lived with me. Well, it'd be harder in different ways. It's still hard when this person doesn't live with you and you're having to coordinate care from a distance. So don't diminish what you're going through, because there are some people who have a different situation than you. So making sure that you're taking care of yourself and recognizing that what you're doing can be difficult. And accepting what you can and can't control. The challenging part about managing care from a distance is, that person is not there. You cannot physically control what's going on with them and pick them up and make sure they're okay. You have to, you know, check in with those local contacts, have someone else check in on them and make sure you're in contact with them. You can't control everything that's going on with them. You can just do the best you can. And just accepting that. And I know that's a lot easier said than done. So utilizing some different caregiver support resources, and you actually may be able to utilize resources both where you live and where your loved one lives, depending on what's available in each area. And you're taking advantage of that right now by being here at this program. And then support groups are also a good thing to look into. It'd be nice to share experiences with other caregivers and see what everyone else is going through and share tips and tricks with others. Can just be helpful to have a safe space for that. And similarly, I recommend that almost everyone go through professional counseling. Actually, I'm going to take that away. Everyone go through professional counseling at some point in their life. There's really never a time where it hurts. There's never a bad time to go. If you're under stress or dealing with a transition, it's a really helpful tool to utilize if you're able to. So just taking care of yourself, recognizing your needs, and utilizing supports when you feel you need them. So this last piece, that's probably one of the biggest questions we get when we talk with people who are caring from a distance is, how am I going to know, when they can't do this anymore, when my person can't live alone, when they need to go to assisted living or come live with me. And there's no right answer. I can't tell you that, okay, when they're exactly this old, or when they've had this diagnosis for this long, or when this happens. It's a gray area, unfortunately, and fortunately, because some people can remain independent for a lot longer than others. And the hardest part is also reminding yourself that your loved one has the right to make their own choices until it becomes a safety issue. There's gonna be a lot of times that you don't agree with what they're choosing to do, and you wish they would, go out and join a group, go to the senior center, get engaged. You can't force people to do things. But if it's becoming a safety issue, that's where, we want to give them as much choice as possible, but their safety is going to be a priority. So having a conversation early, long before you think it's time for them to move, or that they may not be able to stay alone, having a conversation about what they would want in the event it got to that point. Would they want to stay in their local area and move to a facility, or move in with, another relative who lives in that area, because that's where they've lived their whole life and they're comfortable in that area? Versus, maybe moving in with you, but that's going to mean relocating to another area of the country. So having an idea of what they would want makes it a lot easier than having to, hash that out when there's been some type of crisis or emergency or major medical change. And like I said, there's no one determining factor for when someone can no longer live independently. But things to look out for: frequent falls, if they're having trouble managing their medications, particularly in cases of dementia, if they're wandering, if they're leaving their home and getting lost. Self-neglect, so things, like not being able to properly take care of themselves, bathe themselves, feed themselves, that can be a huge red flag. We want people to make sure they're able to take care of themselves and get their basic needs met. And then frequent accidents, if it just seems like every other time you talk to them, there's been some type of a fall or a fender bender. Driving could be a whole other conversation, but there's been some type of an accident that can be, again, a safety issue, and we want to make sure people are safe. Our priorities in these situations are making sure people are safe, making sure people are able to remain in the situation they want for as long as possible, and then maintaining their relationship with you, the caregiver. So safety being first, those are some of the things that you should be looking out for. And if you're not sure, don't hesitate to reach out either to us at the Department on Aging, or to the local area agency on aging where your family member lives, and that's something that we can We can't make the decision for you, but we can definitely talk through, what seems normal, what seems, like it might be getting dangerous. So that was a lot of information. So this is my contact information up here, and then we have the aging helpline right here. You can also visit our website. It's orangecountync.gov/aging. And I will go ahead and stop the recording. Thank you for those of you who are watching the recording.